wait a bit, just in case we're not live. And wait a bit for people to enter and to join us from all over the world. I think now we are ready. So welcome everyone to the 6th and last event of Quinzena'21. For the newcomers that haven't seen the previous 5 conversations of Quinzena, the word Quinzena comes from the Portuguese word quinze, which is 15. 15 days is the amount of time it took for the architect who has the same surname as me, Júlio de Brito, to get planning approval for the project of the building that INSTITUTO is in. INSTITUTO is the organization in Porto that organizes this festival. And this was back in 1955. And just to compare, I took a year and a half to get planning approval for my tiny apartment where we removed 3 walls. So yeah, I think the guys from INSTITUTO are right in celebrating this every year. But this 2021 is the first edition online. And there's some great aspects to that because it's possible that people like Ralph, who is in Belfast, Ireland, and Jonathan, who is in Montreal, and even Sophia in Lisbon, and me in Alcácer, can all come together and people can watch from wherever they are. One last thing, you can watch all the previous sessions in INSTITUTO's YouTube channel. So yeah, that's something also great. So today's theme is tactical urbanism. We are joined by people who do great things in and with the public realm. They are coming from different places in the world, like I just said. First off, we have Ralph Alwani, founder and director of Urban Scale Interventions based in Belfast, Ireland. They are a studio of researchers, architects, designers, strategists, producers, technologists, and makers, and more, I bet. Then we have Sofia Costa Pinto. She is a founding member of EDA Collective in Lisbon. They're an international and multidisciplinary collective of architects, designers, artists, builders, cultural programmers, and scientists. You guys have so many professions, and they experiment alternative forms of interventions through culture, art, and architecture. And all the way from Montreal, Canada, we have Jonathan Chomko, who is an artist working with and against technology, and whose majority of works are designed to be experienced in the public realm. We were supposed to be joined by Joaquin Santiago from Leco Studio, but he is ill, maybe with COVID, we don't know. But thankfully, we have amazing people like Jonathan who have joined, and it's really exciting. So just to remind people that we will have a presentation from each of our guests, and that this will be followed by a conversation moderated by myself. You can comment on our YouTube and Facebook live pages at any time and ask questions, and I like receiving questions because it creates this kind of back and forth between a public that we otherwise don't see. So now I will stop talking and I'll give the word to Ralph.
Cool, thanks guys. I shall share screen. Cool. So yeah, I'm going to just touch on some of the work that we're doing in the studio, particularly looking at kind of temporary interventions and how they inform some of our kind of more longer term work through kind of building narratives with kind of communities at their heart. So, I mean, you've already kind of given us an introduction, but yeah, we're a multidisciplinary team, working kind of a team of about 15, 20, working across projects in Europe and based in Northern Ireland. And, you know, in a nutshell, we kind of tackle challenges for where we kind of live, work and play. So we have a simple philosophy that we do across all of our projects, and it's kind of people, place and purpose. So we won't touch a project unless it has kind of social impact and real benefit to people, and has community buy-in. Each project has a clear kind of social ethos or purpose. And then, you know, although our processes are similar, the place kind of makes the project and the context each time individual. So we work across kind of 4 key areas, looking in kind of co-designing policy and strategy, public space and wellbeing, cultural projects and technology for good. And we use something called the double diamond. So it's kind of a co-design process from the British Council. And quite simply, what we do is we go out and we discover, and we talk to as many people as possible after we're given a brief, because then usually you need something completely different than when you're kind of set the first task. And then we kind of define that through kind of insights, mapping, working within community groups. And then we go back and we develop kind of design proposals, if you like, back out with stakeholders and communities, and then develop the projects, whatever they might be, from city master plans to cultural buildings to products to installations. But kind of to hone in on that, really, what I'm going to focus on is how we use tactical urbanism for 2 kind of simple things, and it's to build narrative and to create civic ownership. So I'll show some projects that we're doing that on. So our Future Foil, based in Northern Ireland, is kind of a 6-mile loop of river, and it's kind of become known for poor mental health conditions. So fueled with kind of post-traumatic stress and being a kind of dark, isolated place, sadly, it's a place that people go to end their lives. So we were kind of commissioned by the Department for Health to look at how we could reimagine positivity around that riverfront. But to jump kind of to the idea of tactical pilots, when we were in one of the initial government meetings, we found this story of a whale called kind of Dopey Dick that swam up the river in the 70s. And he's even got his kind of own pint of beer named over him in the city. So everyone seems to know about Dopey Dick. 100,000 person kind of town. Well, what we did is we didn't want to reinforce around kind of the mental health issues on the river. So we kind of took this kind of narrative of the whale, and we kind of recreated him and put him back on the river for a significant series of events like Halloween and so on. And we engaged with around 15,000 people over the space of 3 years, simply asking them, how do you want to improve your riverfront? So we use those kind of tactical pilots to gain that kind of insight, and then kind of asset map that and look at kind of themes and briefs and projects off the back of that's co-designed. And that kind of tactical pilot then allowed us to form around kind of £20 million worth of interventions that we're rolling out at the moment. And kind of touch on one of them, which is the Foyle Bridge, which is a kind of a prevention barrier basically for this 900 meters or so huge bridge with low railings. And the normal approach is to kind of barrier that bridge, and you still get a sense of imprisonment. Yes, it's safer, but what is it really doing for the communities that live either side of that bridge? So what we were able to do through the consultation of the whale is we created this project called Foyle Reads, which is the kind of largest art installation proposed in the island of Ireland. And essentially through the use of a community app, you can change the colour of the whole bridge on a day of your choosing. So it acts as a prevention barrier, but it changes with the kind of community life of the city. And it's, yeah, as you can see, there's a working pilot there that we've had out for planning consultations. And all of that's derived by building a story, getting civic ownership, and then coming up with design solutions. What tactical pilots allow us to do on the other side is then kind of look at funding and government buy-in. So although it's a bottom-up approach project, it's the first time we had a cross-government department board put together in Northern Ireland to address mental health and well-being, looking at kind of tourism and regeneration benefits as a secondary result. So another project we're working on in the studio is Portview, and it's actually where our studio is based as well. And essentially it's a big old listed heritage mill that we've had national heritage funding for to look at its development. So we kind of have around 44 companies on site at the moment. From we have a brewery, a coffee roaster, a plumber, a jeweller's, you know, you name it, we've kind of got it. And we're looking to expand that to 100 companies with a co-working space, and develop kind of all these different kind of uses through the site. The first kind of theme we're developing there is we've just brokered a partnership with national museums. So we're bringing a national museum on site to create a living museum that kind of expresses the work that the companies are doing on site, and reflects back to the modern, the industrial heritage. The next kind of theme is employment. So we're creating these kind of, you know, very green kind of co-working and incubator spaces for the 100 companies on site. And we're kind of creating the site carbon neutral by 2030, which we're doing alongside the Climate Commission to see how we can show how these heritage buildings can respond to closed loop systems and, you know, better use of carbon offsetting for these kind of big heritage spaces. And then kind of one of the anchor pillars we're doing on the site is a huge kind of training hub with some global digital brands. It actually sits in one of the most deprived communities in the UK. So how can we make a kind of a training school through advanced manufacturing that gets people into jobs? And then finally, tourism. So we've secured a Creative Europe grant to develop kind of rooftop pilots. Faro actually in Portugal being one of the cities, and Barcelona in Spain. Sadly not one in Canada. But we're developing rooftop festivals that create kind of environment and cultural uses. But again, we wanted to find a way of how do we get into the community and kind of build the ethos of this forgotten mill, if you like, that's kind of used to serve, you know, it's the biggest shirt factory mill in the world at one point, and it's now kind of been forgotten. So what's Belfast got to do with bananas? We actually found this story that a guy from the neighbourhood of that mill 110 years ago was the first guy to grow ripe bananas in the UK. And he was also the head gardener for the original mill owner. So he was like, okay, we'll keep that in our back pocket. But then we actually found in the 1930s during the strikes, the Protestant and Catholic communities couldn't agree a song to march onto the City Hall. And they eventually agreed to a song called We Have No Bananas. So for some reason, there was this weird link with Belfast and mills and bananas. And what we did is we used that like local narrative to kind of develop the idea of a space that's not an attraction, but kind of cut across those themes of providing education, employment, and neighbourhood tourism. So we put a grant into the Tourism Board and the National Museums to develop a pop-up museum that's going to open in June. And we're essentially bringing bananas back to East Belfast. So we're going to grow a museum space of 500 banana plants that acts as a flexible museum. And everything that we learn through this tactical pilot over the next 2 years will then inform that long-term vision of the site over the next 5 to 10 years. So here you see it as a kind of growing museum space. Here you can kind of see how we're going to develop robotic labs and making space within the hangar. And of course, it wouldn't be fit without a restaurant. So we're actually developing a banana beer on site with our brewer, and we're going to be using the leaves to cook food. So again, it's trying to show all the ethos of the site through one tactical pilot that we can open up to the community and start that engagement process. And here you can see it being used as a performance space. So that's one that we're opening in June. And just to show a couple of others quickly from the policy side. So we were brought in by Belfast City Council to look at how we could kind of strip the language back of their policy for investment into culture. And we kind of looked at how we could create community-led priorities. So in terms of this pilot, we took on a high street shop in the middle of the main high street in the capital, and we simply stripped down all the policy into activities on the walls, groups, workshops, lock-ins, and all the kind of data from that kind of fed back into a implementation plan of what the city should invest in. So we have 5,000 people through the door in 5 weeks. From senior civil servants to community groups, children from foster care, all feeding into the implementation plan. What that's done is now led to a series of priorities that we're delivering over the next few years. One is a partnership with the Eden Project, you may know from their work in Cornwall, where we're looking at, we've been commissioned to come up with a strategy to turn that high street into an urban forest. The Creative Europe funding I mentioned to develop a rooftop strategy, which has been successful. All of these ideas have come from using that kind of pilot shop, if you like, that pop-up from a policy perspective. And then finally, I'm just going to show you how we can kind of scale that down. So we were asked to develop a strategy for the city to completely reimagine what lighting can be. And through the use of that high street shop, we engage people in what does light make you feel, and what can it do for your city. So what we didn't want to do is create lighting that doesn't respond to people. And that mapping exercise allowed us to co-create lighting infrastructure that thought about that differently. So the first kind of project we did is we brought artists in residence in. So this is an artist that was playing with the concept of a fly on the wall. So what could you hear in terms of conversations? And they were creating these little robotic flies that we actually turned into functional street lights. So you can see the pilot there that kind of can communicate through the city, play sounds, program to different pieces of artwork and soundscapes and so on. And now we're looking at rolling that project that was developed with the kids as a pilot across the street, across the streets in the city. But on the policy side, working in that kind of tactical pilot space allowed us to develop typologies and principles into the policy level that are now rolled out when the council commission lighting artists or contractors. And those principles have started to lead to how kind of tactical pilots can develop into long-term solutions. So here's a quick example of the ones that are happening this year, from 3D printed recycled ocean lights in one square. We have our own bespoke festoon in the city, interactive kind of various lighting installations, slogans that have been chosen by the community that reference the rivers under the streets, and trying kind of new ways of looking at smart city technologies. So in a nutshell, we kind of use tactical urbanism as a way to communicate and to build and to essentially allow us to get community buy-in, so that it kind of allows us to inform and measure the long-term ambitions people want for the places that they live in. And it allows us to kind of find a narrative to kind of connect with people's culture and people's heritage of a site without necessarily having to be from that place. So yeah, as a studio, that's how we learn for longer term vision. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Amazing, thank you. Now we have Sophia. I don't say anything in between the presentations. Poker face.
Okay, so hi everyone, and I'm from EDA. As Catarina said in the beginning, inside EDA we have a little group that it's called Gato Morto, and Gato Morto is a building collective, more punk style inside EDA. So I'm gonna focus the presentation more in the works that Gato Morto develop. Just to explain a little bit about EDA before I start about Gato Morto. So EDA was an association founded in 2013 in Trafaria, which is the south bank of Lisbon in Almada. And it's an area of fishermen, and since 2013 we are there developing projects, very different projects. EDA as an association that has around 30 members, and also it's an association that acts more in a not very, how can I say, like not very permanent. We are always there, but not every day. So we have like projects in moments, because everybody from EDA makes money outside EDA and then come to Trafaria and to EDA in little moments, because also the village is very close to the sea. There is nice beaches. So there is this kind of a dreamy situation. And I'm choose actually two. I'm going to show a little bit what we do. Let me start the presentation, but then I choose two projects that it's from Gato Morto. Can you see it? Okay. So Gato Morto is the building collective of EDA. Let's say briefly. EDA is an association based in Portugal and since 2013 develops social cultural projects. Gato Morto was born after the death of a cat inside an abandoned prison in Trafaria. Trafaria is an abandoned village in Portugal, and Portugal is an abandoned country in Europe. That was occupied by tourists before the pandemic, and us. We work together to transform spaces and what we do. And this part of the presentation, it's like it took us a lot to try to describe what we do. So we put a lot of things trying to describe better because it's quite complex. So we transform unused spaces, collective constructions, temporary cultural centers, building workshops, experimental architecture laboratories, artistic installations, and we work with this multinational team, which means that everybody likes to come to Trafaria from all around and to do things. These are
Sophia,
some of...
We are still seeing just the first...
okay.
I don't know if you were scrolling. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Right. No,
wait.
We had the same issue earlier.
Okay, maybe I'm gonna show like that.
Yes, yes.
Okay. We work together to transform space. So I'm just passing again what I said already. So those are a list of some of Gato Morto projects since 2016, when we found Gato Morto inside this abandoned prison where EDA is also settled there right now. It's an old prison that belongs to the municipality of Almada. And then I choose two of our project that it's called Com Abrigo and Boxing Boxes, because I think they are more about temporary interventions in urban space. So Com Abrigo was an object to raise citizen awareness about housing and public spaces rights. First of all, we were invited to generate and to make a building workshop during a festival in Lisbon in the public space. And the idea was also another EDA project that it's called Biblioteca Itinerante, which means itinerant library, that the group of people that makes the Biblioteca Itinerante, they had a feeling that the itinerant library goes around but never leave anything the places where it passes. So they asked us, Gato Morto, to build something in the street that could be to leave something. And then we start thinking, what could we build there? And so this was more or less the idea. Festival Silêncio was the name of the festival. The Praça São Paulo was the place where we were invited to make this building workshop, and then to build this idea of the library that it stays. And first of all, we thought about doing something that could be related to a book or to benches and a shelf, something like that. But at the same time, this Praça São Paulo, there is a lot of homeless people living there. So we have the feeling that if we decided to build a bench, this will easily be transformed into a bed because of there is a lot of homeless people there. And then we also thought that, okay, why not build directly a bed instead of building a bench that will be transformed into a bed? And then we also thought, well, if we're going to build a bed, maybe it would be nice to have a roof. And then we found this idea of an object that was a little house which was a roof over wheels. This was us building the object, like a very simple object in our workshop in Trafaria. And we built this simple structure that we took to the square, to Praça São Paulo. And with this object, we asked people, the workshop, the start of the building workshop was this question that was, what is missing here in this object that we can call this a house? And then those were the participants of the workshop. It was very children, elderly. It's not everybody in this picture, but it wasn't a lot of people. And then people start saying, giving ideas, and they say, well, I miss a window, I miss a carpet. They also said, well, normally the houses are closed, but please don't close this. So we start discussing a bit, what could we do that? And then we did some improvements, little improvements to transform that in a house. So having a place for plants, shelves and hangers. Also, we put a pillow and mattresses. And then we realized a weird situation that we are, okay, maybe this house we're gonna transform in a house for homeless people. But then we also realized that at that weekend, 50% of us was without house because we had rented our house on Airbnb, because this is also a very common situation in Lisbon, that we get less money with our work than renting our own houses on Airbnb. That sometimes we used to rent our houses, we go to the prison or to a friend's house, and then we say, okay, but we are very worried about the homeless people, but we are homeless also because we have no house. And also we said, but maybe the nice thing, even better, would be if we list this little house on Airbnb. And then we did a listing with this title that was Sleep as a Local in a Special Place in Lisbon. Then we put like a low price, and then people start asking us. And then it was funny because also in Airbnb, you can make this like it's possible to list a place that there is no toilet, for example, and etc. And then but after 48 hours, Airbnb asked us to remove, but also the festival ended. And our idea was to leave the structure there, but then they said, oh, but we were expecting that was a little shelf in the tree, to use books. You cannot leave this whole structure in the square. And then when we decided to remove it, everybody that was using the square, they say no, it was like managers of the bar. This guy on the left used to work there and spend a lot of time in the streets around, and they say no, please don't take this away. And then we said, yeah, but we have to, because they said, so we just take it out from the square. But then they complain a lot with us, saying that we could not leave the structure there. And then we start thinking, where should be an alternative space to put the structure? And then we found a better place that was a riverfront. And then we thought, this is also nice on Airbnb because we can offer as a river view option. And then also it was funny because we found a place that deals with a lot of issues, that it was a border between two neighborhoods. So, and also it was a kind of a private but abandoned space in front of the river. And this I say, okay, would be nice because as it's private, the public power cannot go there and remove it. But at the same time, if they do by chance, let's put in the border, because the guys who take care of the street, they are hired by the neighborhood. So if you put in the border, we thought that nobody would deal with this idea, saying, okay, let's live there. No, it's their place. No, it's mine. You know, like trying to find a place where they could not do anything. And then it was funny because one of the guys that was living, that was every day in the square, actually that guy that is in this picture, he saw this, and it was very near where he used to sleep at night. So he took this and he transformed it in his house. Then he covered with some like plastic material, and then we know that are there still. Actually, it's like it's been 6 months that I didn't pass by, so I'm not completely sure that it's still there. I have to check. And this is more or less the Com Abrigo project. Another project that we did, it's called Boxing Boxes. And this project was from an architect from Mexico, that his name is Daniel Langouret. And he was part of the Triennial of Architecture in Lisbon. And Daniel had this project that his idea was to build open box gym in the public space. But he was in Mexico and he said, I have no idea how to start that. So he invited us to find a place and to make it happen. And it's a project that it's not our authorship in the sense of the project, the designing project, but I think also that all the facilitation and the installation of the piece was very important, that kind of we share the authorship of the project, and it was a very nice thing that happened. Basically, we found this neighborhood that it's called Portugal Novo, which is, there is a lot of wishes, and it's a mix of social neighborhood and SAU project. SAU, it's after the end of the dictatorship, there is a big movement in Portugal where where architects join with the communities to build their own houses, and it's a famous project in Portugal. Some of them are very successful, others are very a failure. This is kind of a failure. It was projected by Manuel Vicente. It's a famous architect in Portugal also, and a very complex context now where we have like a strong community of Portuguese people, families from descendant of Cape Verde and from Cape Verde, and also gypsies. They are in a good moment, but they fight a lot in the past. So as they have a new association of inhabitants, which is made out of a good environment, good people from all this group of people there, we present the project to them, and they say, okay, we have this space and maybe you can install the gym here. We select these positive points of the place, like they never had any facilities done by the public power in their neighborhood. The association of inhabitants could activate the structure, and they were very wishing to have something there because they really feel abandoned. Also because it's weird, but the neighborhood, it's kind of a rich neighborhood, even if it's a small, poor neighborhood inside a rich neighborhood. Also, there is a group of young people that normally gather together to do urban gym already. It's very close to the Triennial headquarters, and they don't have a lot of projects there. And also that was this thing that the project was temporary. It was just only during the Triennial, but then we thought that could stay. And this is also something that Danielle from Mexico would love, that the structure could stay there. And also there was another thing, that the place, there is a lot of trees around. that make a lot of shadows, but those trees was also not taken care by the public power. So it was full of bugs. So we kind of put all these things together also to make pressure in the public, the Junta de Freguesia, to say, hey, now we're gonna have a structure here, it's from triennial, it's not acceptable to have bugs here, and then also they could solve these things. This is the structure. This is Nuno, he's the president of the Association of Inhabitants. But then also what happened, and this is 2 points that it's very funny and I really like to tell about this project. It's that when we were installing the structure, a lot of inhabitants used to say, oh, but why a box gym, you know? Really what it's needed here, it's like a kindergarten place for children to play. And then we say, okay, but if we say that this is a place for children, there is a lot of rules and make it totally impossible. And we knew since from the beginning that that place would be nice for children. And that in fact, the children use a lot and they like the structure. So, and now we also think that it's nice. And now we can make like kind of a hacking there, like to put a swing, things like that. So there is this option. And the other, there is this video that I would like to show, but it's in Portuguese. So maybe it's not the right thing. But another thing that it's so funny that while we were installing the structure, we like to make kind of a not very professional way. So the structure was done by a factory and they came to install, but we decided to prepare us the ground. And then it was very funny because it was a lot of girls working with the inhabitants. And then people say they don't trust very much in the thing. And then this not trustful situation make people arriving, hey, no, I think you should do this. And then also people start speaking a lot, engaging a lot with the whole thing because they said, okay, they won't be able to do that, you know, let's help. And then they see that it was kind of, oh my God, they won't do nothing. And then they start helping because they kind of rescue us. And then it was also funny because they start also criticizing a lot, saying, no, this is terrible. This is so dangerous. The kid's gonna fall then. And then they were complaining. It was in the day before of the launch. And then I said, hey guys, but don't worry, you know, this is just temporary. In 15 days, we're gonna remove everything. And then at the same time, the woman said, no, please don't remove this. And I say, okay, but like decide, you know, do you want it's dangerous or not? And all these things is also super important to us to understand that we try to pay attention a lot in these little details, which we start bringing to us as a kind of a methodology of our work. So this is it, more or less, these two projects.
Super, thank you. And now Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to be here on such short notice. Nice to hear about your projects as well. I hope that what I'm going to be talking about is 3 projects, some of them that I've developed myself and some that I've made with my business partner and creative partner, Matthew Rosier. And they all sort of fit in the public realm, but they're not necessarily I was trying to think of like tactical urbanism as it relates to my work. And I think there's all the projects that I do generally try to address the public in a unfiltered way. So I find that like an artwork, it's interesting to have an artwork that meets people in a place where they're just sort of walking down the street and they encounter something, they have this sort of unfiltered experience. And I think some of the later projects that I talk about also bring up interesting elements of sort of like what the role of software and technology is in urbanism, like how purely software-based intervention can have an effect on how we see ourselves and see our shared spaces. So I'll start with showing some photos and videos and just talk over them. And So the first project I'm going to talk about is called Shadowing. And this was a project I made with Matthew Rosier in 2014. We made it as a response to an award called the Playable City Award, and that is run by Watershed in Bristol in the UK. And they've been running an annual competition for projects that use technology in public space that sort of use the technology of the smart city, in sort of new and unexpected ways. So this work consists of 8 streetlights that can be installed in place of a regular streetlight. And when you walk underneath this lamp, you see the shadow of the person who's there before you. And then when you leave, your shadow walks after you. So it's this very subtle intervention, but it allows for people to use it however they want. And when we were designing this, we sort of knew that we wanted to make something that would augment the presence of people, because for us, the question was sort of like, what does the city need? The city doesn't need more sort of like complicated interventions. What we're in the city for is for each other. We're there to like encounter each other, and all we wanted to do is augment the presence of other people in the city, and sort of remind everybody that this space that we move through is shared. Even if we don't see each other at the same time, we're all walking through the same space. And this system also had the idea with it was that, you know, you might walk through it every day on your way to work, and you might leave a little wave to somebody, and you might be able to start to recognize the other people that share this pool of memory. Of course, there's also a sort of critical perspective to it, that, you know, sometimes when watching people interact with this, you'd hear people talk about surveillance and it being creepy. But I like to think of it as something that really makes tangible the fact that a lot of our movements in public space are tracked, and that a lot of everything we do in our lives leaves a digital trace. And so all this is doing, you know, there's plenty of CCTV cameras around a city that capture our image, but they just don't project it back in the space that they capture. So this is really making very evident what technology is doing all around us. This video was from the install we did in London in 2016. Since then, so it's been installed in around 7 cities, 7 or 8. This was the photo we did this in Tokyo in 2017. We did it around a theater in Paris, the Théâtre du Châtelet in Paris. We did 3 lamps last winter. And then we have one lamp, actually, we were working with the borough of Southwark in London. We were hoping to do a 6 lamp install this winter, sort of in response to COVID, because it's been interesting that this is actually a very appropriate work for COVID, both in the fact that we don't really have any shared space anymore but the public realm, but also that, you know, an interactive public work that you would touch is a real risk. You don't want to be inducing people to touch the same surface. So this is a very sort of contactless artwork. And so we were going to do 6. We did a funding application for that, but it didn't come through. And so we decided to do 1 instead, just without the funding. And so this was a really funny situation where we were working just with the Southwark Borough. And of course, they manage all the street lamps around South London. And so we said, well, can we do one outside of the Tate Modern? And they were completely fine with that. So we have one outside the Tate Modern right now. I think it's still up. And we've been tracking social media, and there's a lot of activity, a lot of posts that are coming from that. And it's just very funny that, you know, if you come to the Tate now, the doors are closed, but you can still access this piece of work in the public realm. The next project I'm going to talk about is a project I made with Matthew as well. And we did this after shadowing. And it was sort of, when we did shadowing, there was a bit of buzz around the project. And someone came to us from a charity called Historic Royal Palaces. And they asked us if we would be willing to work with them on a new visitor experience. Historic Royal Palaces is a charity based in England that take care of all the palaces that the Queen does not live in, which is a very fancy title. And they have one palace that doesn't really have anything left. It's called the Palace at Whitehall. And there's only one building that remains, and that's the banqueting house. And that stands opposite Horse Guards Parade in central London. And Palace at Whitehall used to occupy a lot of central London, but burned down in a date that I should know, but I don't, around 300 years ago. And so the challenge with this palace was sort of like, can we make a visitor experience for a palace that does not exist anymore? And so a lot of the work that we ended up doing was making these experiences that would allow people to walk through the streets of London and stand in places where the palace walls or the palace doors used to be and tap into the stories that happened where they stood. So a lot of this was enabled by, there was a mix of technology that we did. You can see each person's holding sort of a handheld custom device, and then they touch it to these interventions that are sort of remnants of the palace that we designed and built and installed in the public realm. And so there's a sort of sensor technology that allows the device to detect when it's touching the object. In this situation, they are gesturing and pointing at this building that aligns very closely with the wall that the palace used to have. And so as they point at various points on the building, the device is using the compass and the accelerometer to detect which window you're pointing at, and it's like a radio tuner, allows you to hear different bits of audio. This was the palace garden, and here you could touch into these various posts and hear different bits of gossip. So a lot of the gesture we were trying to sort of replicate was, you know, like standing against a wall with a glass, listening to a story. Here's another archway. So the whole experience was sort of, we were trying to, through these subtle interventions, help people really ground, help these stories really ground into the public realm. And what I got from this, sort of from an artistic point of view, was I was interested in these gestures that we were forcing to, well, not forcing, but we were guiding people to do. We were sort of not only leading them on a tour, but we were also creating a performance. So you'd have tourists walking by, looking at these groups of people gesturing with their devices, or like, and sort of seeing that as something strange in the public realm. And that's something that I've kept on exploring in my other work, is sort of what is the, you know, how does technology shape behavior, and what systems can we design to induce people to create specific gestures. Here are some more photos of these archways that we built. A lot of this was handled by Matthew. Matthew did all the planning. He famously sat in on it. He, you know, had to convince the Westminster local authority that this would be safe and secure and was a good idea. And it was actually quite a miracle, I think, that we managed to get planning permission for these pieces. But they are very nice. They're very beautiful. This is all designed in CNC'd. And then everything is burnt. Everything is oak, covered with oak, and then it's burnt with this Japanese finishing technique. So it has this really nice charred color. Here you can see some people populating the archways. This was run as a visitor experience. So there would be like a group going every hour over 2 summers. It was sort of a ticketed event. But very much an R&D project for this organization, because it was just sort of unprecedented to try to make a visitor experience for something that doesn't exist anymore. I like this shot a lot because we see the original, we see like the actual statue And then you see our posts here with their little gargoyles on top. And here you see some people crowding around, pre-COVID, of course. So the last project I'm going to talk about is a project that I'm working on. It's quite recent. And this is a purely software-based project. It is sort of derivative of the work that we explored in Lost Palace, in that it focuses on software and gesture. What it is a website that a group of people go to. The website's called aheartfromspace.com. And when they join the website, they see their GPS location on a map with everyone else's GPS location. So in this video, you see superimposed on top of a drone shot, you see the website, and all these gray dots are all these users' GPS positions. And then the software, the website draws a line between all their points. And the challenge that the project gives to the group is sort of, can this group self-organize to create a heart? And the story behind like why it's a heart is a whole strange. I met a famous cellist named Yo-Yo Ma, and he saw an earlier project that I did, and he was very curious if we could use a project like this to guide 100,000s of people all to form a giant heart that would be visible from space, sort of like a mass of people. So this is a scaled down version of that idea, but it focuses more on the negotiations that the group has to perform. And I think it's sort of an interesting metaphor for what we can achieve if we have different ways of seeing ourselves as a group. If we can understand that we have connections, if we can see that we are connected and we can be sort of bound together and challenged to work in this constrained environment. Because that's what's sort of like the experience of doing this is kind of challenging, because you have both your GPS location, which is not necessarily very accurate, and then you have all of everyone else's GPS locations, which are jumping around. Like you might notice that this dot doesn't line up with this person. And there's like, you have to understand that your real world positions aren't necessarily the positions that make sense, or that are what's being represented. But people do get there eventually, and it's quite fun to see the various hearts that people make. This is a shot of the same thing from the side, where you can get like a clear idea of how the negotiation goes. Of course, this video is, these people have been they did maybe 15 hearts when we did this video shoot, so it's a bit of an idealized scenario. But you can also see that in this one, they have a bit of like untangling to do. They have to, they don't end up in the perfect scenario. So everybody has to sort of understand how they're represented on screen and work to untangle themselves. And so I think this, like to bring this back to shadowing and sort of software, something that Matthew talks a lot about when we think of shadowing is that shadowing is just a lamp with a bit of software. There's no physical intervention really on the street, but it sort of changes people's behavior and it creates this whole like pool of memory, or this whole pool of activity, and people really stand around the lamp and take turns dancing and making gestures. And this is also just a piece of software that people are accessing on their phones, but it's generating a type of behavior in the public realm, in public space. And I think there's an interesting thread to follow here when we think about urbanism, when we think about interventions. If we can think not just about the physical objects, but also about what sort of software we're imbuing them with, and whether we can also have physical objects that can support different types of interactions at different times. Because I think like our physical worlds are being very much inundated through software, through sort of corporate software. If you think of Airbnb, in that example you gave, it affects how we live in our worlds. And so I think what Heart from Space is trying to say is like, we can build new platforms that allow us to connect and move together in different ways. And this is just a really symbolic way of saying that, of sort of expressing that idea. That's me. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much. I'm really inspired by the three of your presentations. Like, it's such sensitive approaches to a brief and task, and like it's something that we've been talking a lot about in this festival. This idea of the architect as, and I say architect, I mean creative person, as a mediator. So to think about architecture and art not necessarily as an end, but as a working method, as a process, as a way of doing things. So instead of delivering a product to a client, we kind of maybe help them to ask the right questions, for example. And I love in these projects that we've been shown today, that the results are sometimes not visible. They're like experiences, movements, conversations, collaborations. It's really beautiful to see. And it really is spot on what tactical is. I think tactical also has a connotation of the military, but I should have researched what that is actually. And yeah, it's kind of interesting, but that's another conversation. Just to start the conversation, because I know it's a bit difficult at the beginning, I will ask a question to Ralph. First of all, Ralph and I studied at the Royal College of Arts, and it's so impressive how much you've done in quite a short amount of time. Like, I'm really, it's kind of mind-blowing how much work you've done, and you've managed to like really engage with the place you're based, Belfast, and understand the system and work with it and deliver really like interesting work. And I wanted to ask you, because I know you've done work in Romania, and I know that you are thinking of doing work in Portugal. What your approach, or do you think that your approach transcends culture? So like, how have you engaged in, because I know you've done some work elsewhere, how does local culture affect your working process?
Yeah, no, it's a really relevant question for us at the moment, because we're a 2-year startup, so we're only really starting to expand into other countries. So an example of that river project, we're just about to kick off a similar process outside Melbourne as well in Australia. So it is, and it's right, it's about creating a framework that can transcend across cultures. So for example, what we're doing in Romania is we're looking at how you can embed new wellbeing spaces within schools. So what we're doing there is we're working with Cluj Cultural Institute. So we're working with the officers on the ground, if you like, the cultural team, to kind of give them a process and a framework that allows them to engage with the communities and the schools that are there. So I think what we're finding is we're almost trying to develop toolkits that allow us to go and empower other people locally to do the processes that we're doing, and then kind of draw that back out and help them to then come up with interventions for intermediate and long term, if that makes sense. But it's fundamental. Yeah, if it doesn't work, and you always get different results for whatever community or place that you're living in. And that's why the narrative thing, I think, is so important. I mean, that Dopey Dick whale thing came from one of like the head of the police in Northern Ireland that just had a very serious face for about 2 hours and then only laughed for the entire meeting when he spoke about a whale. that he remembers when he was a kid. So, and obviously I was a complete outsider going to that city that sits on the border in Ireland. So you can do it. It's just either embedding yourself for a long time to build that relationship, or enabling others locally through process, I think.
Yeah, it reminds me, there's a thing, and I don't know too much about it, but it's called design thinking. And in Norway, it's a big thing, at least, because I have a friend who did a whole course just about this. And it's really a circular approach to working and using creativity to come up with solutions. It's really interesting. And one last thing about your presentation, I loved that idea of the creating a forest on the main street of Belfast. And that brings us back to our first session of Quinzena, where we had rewilding as a theme. That would be really, I don't know if it's possible, if it will actually happen, or is it more of an ideal vision?
No, it's been put forward by the City Hall as a priority project for 2023. So we have a budget. We just have to somehow make it work now. So, so that's the year's task ahead.
Wow, that's fantastic.
We'll see.
Great. And now, I mean, like all of you, just interrupt me, by the way. Like, you can comment on each other's work also. And if you have questions, otherwise I'll just talk and ask questions myself. But my point of view is or your point of view is as important as mine. So I'm happy to hear. But Sophia, I thought both projects were super interesting. I think the one of the boxing ring, I knew about it from Arc Daily because it got a lot of attention. It's so cool. And the other one about this bed is really beautiful. And I wanted to hear what your opinion or what your thoughts are on the role of culture in the time that we are in now, like time of crisis. Why? Like, what does it say about our public spaces for communities, and the importance of that?
Well, I think it's funny because those kind of places, more like social neighborhoods, they have, even if they don't have a lot of infrastructure to use the space, I have the feeling that they use the space more than places that have a lot of infrastructure. So I think also this is a challenge for, in a way, they were super happy when they saw the structure was coming. But in fact, the space was already being used, because in other parts of the city, you have this challenge, how to bring people here. And then it's very common, for example, in Almada, where we have a close a relationship to the municipality. They say, hey, we would like to make a shadow here in this square because it's too hot in the summer. And then they say, yeah, but we have to take care because this square is used about skateboarders and we don't want them to use the whole structure to skateboard. And then you say, hey, you guys, people are already using the space and you don't want them to use the space. You want, I don't know who else, you know. And I think for me, it's very much as someone that it's acting a lot in the urban space and think a lot of that. I think it's very important for everyone that works in this area, like to see and to look what it's already happening there, you know, and related to the pandemic and this thing. Of course, everybody should use more the open air spaces, but a lot of things is already being used. And I think architects, designers, we go to the places and we say, okay, let's bring our idea the way we want, and kind of ignoring what it's. And I think also that it's very I like to think also about this thing, because there is this idea of let's generate bottom-up projects, and I really don't like this term, because I think this term keep the verticality of the structure, you know, and then I think this is not nice. It's not fruitful, you know, like, because and also but I also use this term a lot, and then I keep all the time trying to think and to develop better the term. Then we start using, I prefer now, for example, grass hood, but maybe I will change in 6 months. I will say, no, grass hood is not good because of that. And then I also think that this is we say, let's do for the community, and then everybody change it to let's do with the community. And also I think it's very much now, these days I'm thinking a lot like, okay, how we do something for the community, how we do something with the community, and then how the community does something for us, you know. Like, I think it's about this to let be affected about the whole thing, you know, like to do things. And then I think that this thing, everybody at home in the pandemic, you have time to think, you know, instead of screwing, you have time to think. And then I think this is, but it's for sure for me, it's like, it's a challenge to improve the use of the public space and the open space and these kind of things. Even why not having schools, more schools outside, you know, for example, I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, there's been some conversation about COVID being the killer of public space, and I mean, this either of you three can, if they want to, engage with this question. What do you guys think? Do you think COVID is a killer of cities, and do you think it's the killer of public space also? I don't think so, but what do you guys think?
I mean,
well,
I was going to say that, like, the conversation that Matthew and I had, especially around shadowing in the beginning of COVID, I think that I guess some people are leaving the cities. Some people who can are leaving the cities, who can work from home. Like, I think there's a sort of trend of like Zoom towns, people just going to a nice place and working from there. But I think there's something, I think cities will always draw people in. I think there's a certain charm to them. And I think also public space is all we have right now. Like, when I go out in Montreal, like, we have like museum, everything's closed right now. Museums are closed. So you go out on the mountain, like the big park in the center of Montreal, and it's full. And you go to the skating rinks and they're full. And it kind of feels like we're living in the 1800s or something, where like our entertainment options are so limited. So like skating is just like, you know, it's the greatest thing you can do, to go for a little skate with your friends. And it's kind of nice to see a lot of people out. I think that's what I've thought in COVID. It feels like there's really no other space to hide in. And so public space is really valuable, and people are really out there and seeing each other and really appreciating. Like, sometimes I'll go for a walk and I just appreciate seeing other people, you know, after spending a day like in this box.
Yeah, totally. In Portugal, they had to ban things like surfing and certain outdoor activities, because like everyone was really doing them even more, because everything else was banned. Jonathan, I have here a question from Rich. He's asking, why do you think fun and humor is often looked down upon in architecture and art, I guess? Oh, no, not in art, in architecture, whereas in art, film, music, etc., it's so celebrated.
Well, I was thinking recently about London, living in London and going to the Architectural Association. I remember going to like the AI exhibition, and architecture is just very like it's invested in its seriousness, you know. It is like a profession that builds things, and so it can't be too frivolous. But I do think I've been reading a book, and I was looking at the notes recently, a book called Dancing in the Streets by Barbara Ehrenreich. And the whole book is sort of a history of like how we lost collective joy, and like the moments of and how collective joy, so like carnival, like dancing, any sort of like fun was sort of like stripped out of public life and stripped out of cultural life. And the point she makes is that like up until a certain point, when you went to the theater, you know, even if you're watching a play, you would be talking back to the screen. It would be sort of like a dialogue. But there became a certain point, I don't remember the date, but when the mode of consumption of art and culture was really like you sit still and you're quiet. And that was sort of like, it was sort of a way for the, you know, like that was high class art was to be really still and really sort of austere. And so I think that sort of hierarchy still exists, where things that are really fun and engagement and interactive are considered a little less high class, basically.
Yeah, we talked a lot about this in some of the previous sessions, and it makes me think I really like children's songs and events, because there is none of this barrier of like formality, so you can just talk back. It's like we can be a bit childish, and it's okay. I wish there was more of that in the professional world, but I agree that in a certain way we are also building structures that need to be safe for people.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sophia had a point, was going to say something about play, I think.
No, I'm not sure about this thing about safety, you know, like because the first time I think the first time I went to Germany, Berlin, I don't know where, some city in Germany, I looked to the playgrounds and I say, what are they planning to kill the kids? And I really like the playgrounds that has a lot of risk on it. And also, for example, there is one nice in Lisbon that it's a pyramid of
ropes.
Yeah, and there are much bigger in Antwerp. I saw ones much more bigger than that one, but I like that kind of things, that the children, they saw that and they have the feeling that it's super dangerous, the parents as well, but actually it's not, because so I like this kind of things. Of course, I'm not saying that I want kids to die in a playground, but I think this limit, it's a bit, in Portugal it's a big problem. It's too much safe, you know, in a way that they I think they don't develop well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And having been in Norway for a few years, in Norway they have a completely different approach, where they're always outside, the kids, even in the rain. And it's, yeah, I mean, they don't have a choice, but it's, yeah, a completely different approach. In Portugal, when it's raining, you call each other worrying, what are you doing? Are you safe inside? I have a question for you, Sophia, again. Paulo Moreira is asking, Sophia, how are you? Como estás? I'd like to ask about the Trafaria prison. What is going to happen to it in the future? And I wanted to ask you also, to add on to Paulo's question, how did you guys come across this building? How did you?
So just for them to understand a bit, the Trafaria prison it's a super big space. The prison was deactivated out in the 80s, in the beginning of the 80s, when the dictatorship ended in Portugal. Since then, the municipality bought the building from the government, and then they have a lot of plans, but they never make it happen. And then it's a lot of buildings. It's kind of a complex, and even if people working in the municipality, they once after our first project, where Paulo was also in Cova de Vapor in 2013, when we finished, they said, a worker in the municipality said, hey, they have this prison, they try to do a lot of things, but it's being very hard. And don't you like to think things and bring ideas to activate the space? And then it started a very difficult moment for our association, where without money we start presenting projects and idea for the prison that never happened because it's very bureaucratic and a big problem. But then in 2016, when we went there for the first time, because we won a small grant from European Cultural Foundation, like a 10,000 euros grant, and the idea was it was a partnership between us and an association in Hamburg. And then the idea of our project that was called Plataforma Trafaria, and then we changed the name for Prisão Paraíso, which means paradise prison. The idea was to think in a more practical way, occupying and living the space and cooking, activating a kitchen and bedrooms and etc., how it could be the future of that space. But also very demanding and tough for us, because no electricity. Then after sometimes we got electricity. That was when we found the Gato Morto. But then this year, what happened that the municipality, and then there is a lot of political issues related to parties. It was the Communist Party, then they lost the power for the Socialist Party. So little issues that are important in Portugal, but maybe you guys gonna be a bit lost. But basically, the Socialist Party is it's on power now there, and since 3 years ago, they have still 1 year more, and they really took this as a main objective of their moment to make something happen there. And also a lot of discussion, how can you deal with the memory of this space, which is very sad and difficult, because a lot of people was tortured there and etc. So they sign a partnership with the Universidade Nova de Lisboa, and the Universidade Nova de Lisboa won an European funding to make a campus of art and technology of 7 million euros there. It's gonna be like a huge impact. In my word now, it's very much about this thing, like it's full of good intentions, like to involve the local community, to respect the site and the history and the memory. But then my opinion that it's not enough, good intentions to make it happen. And then I'm not seeing a good effort and a good path of this Universidade Nova de Lisboa coming, even if the project is nice, their ideas are good, but I think it's not very easy not to completely, because of the gentrification process in Lisbon that reflect a lot there, and then all the community and etc. I think it's gonna be very strong for the population and etc. This new university, this new campus there. But at the same time, I think it's a good thing, like I don't think like a hotel would be better. So I think it's nice, but I think it's also a lot of effort to make it to be in a good way. And I think they are not really in a good path. I don't know if I answered to Paulo, but basically it's that this is, and then we are also following a bit how this is gonna happen, and also because people also ask us how much do we think that we are also gentrificators in that place, because we wasn't born there, and this is something also that, like, for me, gentrification, you cannot it's not about our fault, it's like policies, it's public policies about gentrification. So this is something that I'm trying to also in EDA to invest more, to make pressure, to make happen, like to have policies to avoid the gentrification, because it's not me, no, I'm not raising my rental, I'm not putting my apartment on Airbnb because I'm gonna be a gentrifier, and then you kill yourself without money also in Portugal. So this balance, it's a challenge also that we think a lot about this.
Yeah, I think gentrification as a word maybe has a lot of bad name, but I mean, it's also can be a good thing, but that's another discussion. Ralph, it reminds me a little bit of the, did you say it was a mill, the building where your office is located? I don't know how the two compare, like in terms of scale, but yeah, I don't know, like you could maybe lend some insights to the Portuguese example.
Yeah, no, it's something that we're pretty conscious of with the mill project, because it is going to gentrify the area. I mean, we've got craft breweries to coffee roasters and God knows what else, but it's making sure that an integral part of that does have genuine benefit to the community. So, for example, that mill is in one of the most deprived areas of the UK, and the education retainment rates over 16 are like the lowest in the UK. So that has to be the core principal focus. I guess our mill is kind of similar in size to the LX factory in Lisbon, so to give you a kind of feel. But I mean, we're lucky in the sense that it's owned by a charity, so our structure allows us to make sure that the social impact is valued as much as the monetary impact. So I think starting there. So one of the things we're doing, so we have 44 companies, we're going to have 100 companies. We're establishing something called a social tenancy that allows anyone that comes on the site, they have to give time into the education model, to a percentage of their rent will go back into community projects. So we're setting up structures, as you say, that look from a policy level right the way down to how can we empower tenants. And then training is a key component of that site. So we're not just going to put shiny machines or courses in there that people can't access. The people we're working with have shown results of getting the most low level unskilled communities into high level skilled jobs. So we're making sure that's integral alongside coming and having a banana beer, if that makes sense. So it's the balance of I don't think we have to shy away from gentrification. I think it's the opposite. It's just making sure that there's a social conscience around it and that it is benefiting the neighborhoods that it's in, if that makes sense.
It happens in the right way. And I guess it depends a lot on having a certain client, what kind of client you have, if you have what intentions the client has. Yeah.
But equally, I think we can go the other way too much if we try to be so social in some of these areas that if you haven't got money, you can't do anything in some realities. And it's so that's why it's about resilience but more the sustainability of the model. The more money you make, the more good you can do sometimes, and it's just making sure that there's a balance between the two, I think.
Yeah, great.
Let me say something, like it's funny because both of your guys, the work you show, there is a lot of light on it, and this is something that our projects, we never got some strong technology and light thing, and I would love to do, because I think this subtle thing of the light bring that it's not material. I really enjoy the things you present related to light and shadows and color. I think it's super nice. Maybe one day we can do something in Trafaria, in the prison.
That'd be great.
Together.
Yeah.
On that, Jonathan, I love when you were saying about, you know, how these tactical pilots can, and tactical urbanism can shape behavior and measure behavior. I think that's the joy of these small projects, that if the issue's political, social, whatever it is, if you can land these things to shift people's mindsets, whether it's physical or digital, that's a great way to then inform, you know, longer term stuff. So even though it was quite different, I guess, of why we're both doing those installations, if you like, I think there's a common thread between them of that, you know, that behavior change piece, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
It's no, Jonathan, you say.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I guess that I used to, like, I come from like a design background, so I'm very like the process of, like, my process of making is very much a process of like testing and sort of like a series of pilots. Like when I first thought of shadowing, I remember the first thing I made was just like a video. It was just like on my laptop, and it would just like play back video within a certain interval. But I think there's just like a lot that can be learned from, like, it's so much easier to understand things when they're actually interactive. I think there's just there's certain things you can't quite understand until you experience it, or until you're like put into a certain situation. And so I think for both like artistic experience purposes, but also in terms of like getting people on board, like getting stakeholders and helping people understand what it could be. But actually that works both ways. Like if you make an artistic work that gives people an experience that they haven't had before, it helps them understand what the rest of their life could be as well.
Yeah, that's really great. And I love how incredibly sensitive the shadowing project is, and also I call it a beating heart, but I can't remember the historic, the invisible palace.
The Lost Palace.
The Lost Palace.
Yeah.
It's incredibly sensitive. Like it's a small object that's remote control or whatever you call it. But I remember going to your studio, and it's so technical and it's so complicated, and it's not sexy actually. It's very technology driven, and I love that contrast. Like that's great to see. Anyway, I think we've come to our time now to go, but thank you so much for my amazing 3 last guests for this grand closing of the festival. And now we all have to go have a beer or a glass of wine or
cup of coffee.
Or coffee. Well. But yeah, and just to remind people that they can rewatch all the conversations on the YouTube channel of INSTITUTO. But I just wanted to thank Sophia, Ralph, and Jonathan for their presentations. And yeah, I hope you have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Meet you
guys.
all.
Bye, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.